I was just a divorced delivery driver dropping off a package when an elderly stranger recognized my face and started sobbing. What he told me next about my grandfather's secret from the Korean War made me understand why my family had always struggled with money. My name is Bryson Thompson, and if you'd told me 6 months ago that I'd be wearing a brown delivery uniform instead of my regional manager suit, I would have laughed in your face. But life has a way of humbling you when you least expect it. At 38 years old, I thought I had everything figured out. Good job at a lumber supply company, beautiful wife, smart daughter, 2-story house in the suburbs. Then Melody, my wife of 12 years, decided she loved her CrossFit instructor more than she loved our marriage. The divorce papers came on a Tuesday. By Friday, I was packing boxes. By the next month, I was delivering them for $12 an hour plus tips that never came. Funny how fast you can fall from grace when the legal system decides you're the one who should pay for a marriage you didn't destroy. But this story isn't about my divorce. It's about the morning of October 15th, when I knocked on the door of a mansion and discovered my grandfather had been keeping a secret that would have changed our entire family's history. The man who answered that door was Aldrich Pemberton, 89 years old, wearing a cashmere cardigan that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He took one look at my face and his knees nearly buckled. "You're a Thompson, aren't you?" he said, his voice breaking like glass. When I confirmed my name, tears started rolling down his weathered cheeks. This complete stranger, this wealthy man in his mansion, was crying at the sight of me. Not because of anything I'd done, but because I looked exactly like my grandfather, Cecil Thompson, a man who'd been dead for 16 years. What happened next would reveal why my family had lived paycheck to paycheck for 3 generations when we should have been millionaires. It would explain why my grandfather, a decorated Korean War veteran, never talked about his service except when bourbon loosened his tongue. And it would teach me that some men are too proud to accept rewards for doing what they believe is simply right. Aldrich Pemberton had been searching for my family for 70 years. Private investigators, military records, genealogy databases, everything money could buy. He'd been trying to pay a debt that my grandfather refused to acknowledge even existed. A debt that started on a frozen hill in Korea, where my grandfather carried a wounded 19-year-old private 2 miles through enemy fire, taking 3 bullets in the process and never once considering leaving him behind. That October morning started like every other delivery day. My alarm went off at 5:30 in my cramped apartment above my Uncle Royce's garage. I showered in the bathroom with the cracked tiles, made instant coffee because I couldn't afford the good stuff anymore, and put on my delivery uniform that still smelled like yesterday's sweat no matter how many times I washed it. My daughter Juniper had called the night before from her mother's house, asking if I could come to her school play. I had to tell her I was working. Again. The first 20 deliveries that morning were routine. Small packages to suburban homes, signatures collected, fake smiles exchanged. Then I reached the Northbrook Hills neighborhood, where the houses got bigger and my self-pity got worse. Every mansion was a reminder of what I'd lost, what I'd probably never have again. The GPS directed me through streets named after English counties: Devonshire, Canterbury, Willowcrest. Rich people always name their streets after places they'll never actually visit. The Pemberton estate sat at 1847 Willowcrest Drive, behind iron gates that probably cost more than my old annual salary. The package in my hands was small, maybe a book, addressed to Aldrich Pemberton. Nothing special about it, except for the destiny it was about to deliver along with whatever was inside that brown wrapper. I pressed the intercom button, announced myself as a delivery driver, and watched those iron gates swing open like they were welcoming me to a different world. The driveway curved through gardens that looked professionally maintained by people who knew the Latin names of every flower. The house itself wasn't just big, it was architecturally perfect. All clean lines and tall windows that caught the morning sun like prisms. Standing at that front door, I had no idea I was about to meet the man whose life was intertwined with my family's fate. I had no idea that my grandfather's greatest act of heroism had a price tag he'd refused to cash. I was just Bryson Thompson, delivery driver, trying to make it through another shift. Then Aldrich Pemberton opened his door, and everything changed. Life after divorce feels like starting from zero. 6 months ago, I went from being a regional manager at a lumber supply company to delivering packages for $12 an hour. The divorce took everything. The house, most of my savings, even my confidence. My ex-wife Melody got custody of our daughter Juniper, and I see her every other weekend in my cramped apartment above my Uncle Royce's garage. The fall from middle-class comfort to barely scraping by happened so fast, it still doesn't feel real. One day, I was approving purchase orders for $100,000 lumber shipments. The next, I was wearing a brown uniform and scanning barcodes. The lawyers had been surgical in their destruction of my financial life. Melody got the house because Juniper needed stability. She got alimony because she'd sacrificed her career to raise our daughter, even though she'd worked part-time at a yoga studio by choice, not necessity. I got the privilege of paying for it all while living in a space so small I could touch both walls of my bedroom at the same time. My Uncle Royce had offered me the apartment out of pity. He ran an auto repair shop and lived in the main house with his wife Darlene and their 2 boys. "Just until you get back on your feet," he'd said. But we both knew those feet weren't finding solid ground anytime soon. The lumber company had eliminated my position 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized. They called it restructuring, but I knew better. Nobody wants a regional manager who's drowning in personal problems. Every morning, I loaded up my delivery van thinking about how my grandfather Cecil would react if he saw me now. He raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8. My mother Beth and father Douglas were driving home from their anniversary dinner when a drunk driver ran a red light. One phone call and my whole world collapsed. But grandfather was there, solid as oak, ready to take in a scared kid who'd just become an orphan. "Thompsons don't quit," he used to say, his weathered hands gripping my shoulders. "We might bend, but we don't break." He lived by those words. Cecil Thompson had worked 40 years at the railroad yards, never missing a shift, never complaining about the arthritis that twisted his fingers or the back pain that made him wince when he thought no one was looking. He raised me in a 2-bedroom house on the south side of town, where the paint peeled and the floors creaked, but there was always food on the table and love in the walls. He died when I was 22, just after I'd graduated college, the first Thompson to get a degree. The cancer took him quick, 6 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. He left behind nothing but his old war medals in a shoebox and stories about Korea that he'd only tell after a few beers. Even then, the stories were vague, more about the cold and the food than any actual combat. "War isn't like the movies, Bryson," he'd said once, staring at something I couldn't see. "Heroes don't feel like heroes. They just feel lucky to come home." The morning of October 15th started like any other. I had 43 packages to deliver, mostly to the wealthy Northbrook Hills neighborhood where houses look more like museums. Each delivery route card got sorted in order of efficiency, not because the company cared about my time, but because they tracked every minute, every mile, every penny of gas. I used to avoid the rich neighborhoods. Seeing how the other half lived just reminded me of everything I'd lost. The partners at Melody's law firm lived in Northbrook Hills. So did the orthopedic surgeon she'd dated before me, the one her mother still insisted was the one who got away. But that morning, I had no choice. The computer generated the routes, and drivers who deviated got written up. "Another day in paradise," I muttered to myself, checking the address for the 38th delivery, 1847 Willowcrest Drive, the Pemberton estate. The name meant nothing to me then. Just another rich family in another big house, probably ordering something expensive and unnecessary while I struggled to make rent. I grabbed the package, small and light, maybe a book or documents, and headed for the van. The morning sun was already hot, October in our state being more like extended summer than actual fall. My uniform stuck to my back as I drove through neighborhoods that got progressively wealthier, the houses growing larger and the lawns more perfect with each turn. By the time I reached Northbrook Hills, I felt like I'd traveled to a different country, one where people worried about stock portfolios instead of grocery bills. The Pemberton mansion stood behind iron gates that opened automatically when I pressed the intercom. The driveway alone was longer than my entire apartment building. As I walked up the marble steps with the small package, I noticed my hands were dirty from loading boxes all morning. I wiped them on my uniform pants, feeling out of place. The front door was solid mahogany with brass fixtures that gleamed like gold. I rang the doorbell and heard it echo inside, a melodic chime that probably cost more than my monthly salary. While I waited, I looked around at the perfectly manicured hedges, the fountain with water cascading down marble tiers, the garage that could fit 6 cars. This was the kind of wealth that made you angry if you thought about it too long, so I tried not to think at all. When the door opened, I expected a maid or butler. Instead, an elderly man answered, dressed in an expensive cardigan over a crisp white shirt. His blue eyes immediately locked onto my face, and his whole body went rigid. The color drained from his complexion like someone had pulled a plug. "Good morning, sir. Package for Aldrich Pemberton?" His voice came out as a whisper. "Dear God, you're a Thompson, aren't you?" "Yes, sir. Bryson Thompson. How did you know that?" His hands started shaking violently. Not the gentle tremor of age, but full body shakes like he'd grabbed a live wire. Tears streamed down his face, catching in the deep lines around his eyes. "You look exactly like him, exactly like Cecil. You knew my grandfather?" "Knew him?" "Son, your grandfather saved my life in Korea. December 3rd, 1952. Hill 266, near the Chosin Reservoir." The package slipped from my hands and hit the marble step with a soft thud. Nobody outside our family ever talked about my grandfather's service. He'd won a Bronze Star, but that was all I knew. The medal sat in a safety deposit box at First National Bank because I couldn't afford to keep paying rent on a storage unit for his things. "Mr. Pemberton, I think there might be some confusion." "No confusion. You have his eyes, his jaw, even the way you stand. Slightly favoring your left foot, shoulders back but not rigid. Military bearing without the military service, am I right?" He was right. Grandfather had taught me to stand that way, said it made a man look confident even when he wasn't. But how? Could this stranger see all that in the 30 seconds since he'd opened his door? "Please, you have to come inside. I've been searching for your family for 70 years. I hired private investigators, checked military records, everything. Cecil Thompson disappeared after the war like he never existed. Mr. Pemberton, I'm on the clock. I can't just come inside. They track us by GPS. If I stay in one location too long, I get flagged. I'll call your supervisor. Tell them there's been a medical emergency. Please, son. I'm 89 years old. I might not get another chance." "Another chance for what?" "To repay a debt that's haunted me my entire life. To keep a promise I made on a frozen hillside when I was certain I was going to die." I looked at this man, this stranger who knew my grandfather's name, who could see Cecil Thompson in my face from across a doorway. His tears were real. The desperation in his voice was real. And something in my gut told me that whatever he had to say would matter more than any delivery schedule. I could lose my job. "I'll make sure you don't. I own shares in your delivery company. Started buying them 20 years ago when I thought it might help me find Cecil's family. I own shares in lots of companies, always looking, always hoping someone named Thompson might show up in an employee database. You bought shares in companies just to find my grandfather. I would have bought entire companies if I thought it would help. You don't understand yet, but you will. Your grandfather didn't just save my life. He saved everything I would become. every child I would have, every good thing I would ever do. How do you repay that? How do you find a man who doesn't want to be found? My phone buzzed with an automated reminder about my delivery schedule. 17 more packages to deliver before noon. The algorithm didn't account for Destiny showing up at a front door in Northbrook Hills. It didn't calculate the moment when your past catches up to your present in the form of an 89-year-old man who'd been searching for your family longer than you'd been alive. "Give me 5 minutes," I said. Against every rule in the delivery driver handbook, I followed him inside. The house was magnificent beyond anything I'd ever seen up close. Oil paintings in gilt frames lined the hallway, Persian rugs covered polished hardwood floors, and a chandelier that probably cost more than I'd make in 5 years hung from a cathedral ceiling. But Aldrich moved through it like none of it mattered, leading me with urgent steps to a wood-paneled study. The study smelled like leather and old books, the kind of room where important decisions got made by important people. Aldrich went straight to a painting of a fox hunt and swung it open on hidden hinges, revealing a wall safe. His fingers trembled as he worked the combination, missing numbers twice before getting it right. 70 years, he muttered while spinning the dial. 70 years I've been waiting for this moment. He pulled out a yellowed envelope, sealed with red wax that had darkened with age. The paper looked fragile, like it might crumble if handled too roughly. He held it like some people hold newborn babies, with a mixture of reverence and fear. "I wrote this letter in 1953, he said, turning to face me. "Your grandfather refused to take it, said he didn't save me for money. But I made him a promise that day on that frozen hill, and Pembertons keep their promises." "What happened on that hill?" Aldrich sat down heavily in a leather wingback chair and gestured for me to take the one across from him. The leather creaked as I sat, probably worth more than everything I owned. I was 19, a private first class, spoiled rich kid who got drafted and thought the war would be an adventure. I learned different real quick. Chinese forces had us surrounded on Hill 266. The temperature was 20 below zero. Men were losing fingers and toes to frostbite faster than they were losing them to bullets. He paused, staring at something beyond the room's walls, back in Korea, back in 1952. When the Chinese attacked that morning, it was like the whole mountain came alive with gunfire. Our lieutenant got hit in the first wave. Your grandfather was our squad leader, a staff sergeant who'd been in country since the beginning. When I got hit by shrapnel in both legs, everyone else ran. Can't blame them. It was chaos, pure chaos. But Cecil threw me over his shoulder like I weighed nothing and started running. "He carried you out?" 2 miles through enemy territory, the Chinese were everywhere, taking shots at us from behind rocks, trees, anywhere they could hide. Your grandfather took 3 bullets doing it. 1 in his shoulder, 2 in his leg. I could feel his blood soaking through my uniform, mixing with mine. But he never dropped me, not once. He just kept moving, kept talking to me, telling me about his wife back home, his son, Douglas, your father. Telling me I was going to make it. My throat tightened. Grandfather had never mentioned being wounded. There were no Purple Heart medals in that shoebox, no scars I'd ever seen. When we got to the medical station, I was delirious from blood loss. But I remember grabbing his hand and saying, "My family owns Pemberton Pharmaceuticals. We'll reward you, anything you want." He just smiled and said, "Kid, just stay alive. That's reward enough." Aldrich stood up and walked to his desk, pulling out a folder thick with documents. After the war, my father wanted to honor Cecil. We'd built our fortune making medical supplies for the military, everything from bandages to morphine. Father said any man who'd save his son like that deserved to be rich. But your grandfather had vanished. No forwarding address, nothing. The military said he'd been discharged and that was all they could tell us. Why didn't he want to be found? I've asked myself that question for 70 years. Pride, maybe. Or perhaps he just wanted to leave the war behind. But my father was as stubborn as I am. He set up a trust fund in 1953 with very specific instructions. It would sit there, gathering interest, until a Thompson claimed it. And no one ever did. No one knew about it except our lawyers and bankers. We couldn't find Cecil to tell him. I hired investigators in the 60s, 70s, 80s. The internet gave me hope in the 90s. Social media in the 2000s. But Cecil Thompson was a common enough name, and without more information, it was like searching for a specific grain of sand on a beach. He handed me the envelope. Its weight heavier than its size suggested. "What made you keep looking all this time?" "Because I got to live, son. I got to come home, go to college, meet my wife, have 3 children, build a business, watch my grandchildren grow up. 70 years of life that I wouldn't have had if your grandfather had left me on that hill. How do you give up on repaying that?" Aldrich handed me the envelope with both hands, like he was passing over something sacred. My hands shook as I broke the 70-year-old wax seal. It cracked and fell away in pieces, dark red fragments landing on the Persian rug. Inside was a document from Pemberton Pharmaceuticals and First National Bank of Boston. The paper thick and official, with typed text that had faded but was still readable. "Read it out loud," Aldrich said softly, leaning forward in his chair. I cleared my throat and began. "This trust, established January 15, 1953, in gratitude for Staff Sergeant Cecil Thompson's heroism in saving Aldrich James Pemberton III, shall be held in perpetuity until claimed by Cecil Thompson or his direct descendants. Initial deposit, $10,000. I looked up at Aldrich. $10,000 was a lot of money in 1953. He smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him. "Keep reading." With compound interest guaranteed at 8% annually, unclaimed and accumulating. The paper trembled in my hands. I knew enough about compound interest to understand what this meant, but my brain refused to do the math. It was too big, too impossible. 70 years, I whispered. 70 years of compound interest. "Do you know what that comes to?" Aldrich asked. I pulled out my phone with fumbling fingers opening the calculator app. $10,000, 8% interest, 70 years. The number that appeared on the screen didn't look real. $2.1 million, I said, my voice barely audible. 2.1,400,000 and change, Aldrich corrected. Your grandfather never knew what he walked away from. He was too proud to accept what he called charity. But this isn't charity, son. This is a debt of honor. I can't accept this. You don't even know me. I could be anyone claiming to be Cecil's grandson. Aldrich laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and relief. Could you? Look in that mirror behind you. I turned to see an antique mirror in a golden frame. My reflection stared back, but for a moment I saw my grandfather's face. The same strong jaw, the same deep-set eyes, the same nose that had been broken in a bar fight before the war, and never set quite right. Besides, Aldrich continued, pulling out another document, I've already had my lawyers verify everything. Your birth certificate, your father Douglas's death certificate, Cecil's military records. It's all here. You are the rightful heir to this trust. This can't be real. Things like this don't happen to people like me. People like you? You mean good people who've had bad luck? Working people who've struggled their whole lives because their grandfather was too proud to accept a reward? That's exactly who this should happen to. Aldrich pulled out yet another document from the folder. There's more. My father also bought a life insurance policy on himself, with Cecil as the beneficiary. When my father passed in 1987, and we couldn't find Cecil, it went into another trust. That one has been growing for 38 years. How much? I asked, though I wasn't sure I could handle another shock. $800,000, give or take, so in total, you're looking at about $3 million. My knees buckled. I sat down hard in the leather chair, my delivery uniform suddenly feeling like it was suffocating me. $3 million. I made $30,000 a year delivering packages. $3 million was 100 years of work. It was Juniper's college paid for. It was a house of my own. It was freedom from the crushing weight of financial fear that had been my constant companion since the divorce. "Why?" I asked, looking up at Aldrich. "Why keep looking all these years? You could have just let it go." "Let me show you something," he said, walking to his desk. He opened a drawer and pulled out a photograph, black and white, worn at the edges. "This is my family, my wife Margaret, who passed 5 years ago, my son James, my daughters Patricia and Carol, 7 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren with another on the way." He placed the photo in my hands. They were all smiling, gathered around a Christmas tree, the kind of family photo that filled an entire wall. None of them would exist if your grandfather had left me on that hill. Every birthday, every graduation, every wedding, every moment of joy and love and life, I owe to Cecil Thompson. The money sitting in those trusts, that's nothing compared to what he gave me, but it's all I have to offer. He never said anything, never mentioned you, never mentioned the money. That's because he was a hero, son. Real heroes don't talk about what they've done. They just carry it quietly and move on. 3 hours later, I sat in my delivery van outside the Pemberton mansion, holding verified bank documents for nearly $3 million. Aldrich had called his lawyers right there in the study, and they'd arrived within an hour with all the paperwork ready. Everything was legitimate. The money would be transferred within 5 business days. I'd signed so many documents my hand cramped, each signature making it more real, more impossible to deny. Aldrich had walked me to the door, moving slowly but with purpose. "Your grandfather gave me 70 more years of life," he said, gripping my shoulder with surprising strength. "I built a pharmaceutical empire, had 3 children, 7 grandchildren. None of that would exist without Cecil Thompson. This money isn't a gift, Bryson, it's a debt finally paid. Why didn't he ever tell us about this, about you?" That was Cecil. He never saw himself as a hero. To him, he was just doing what needed to be done. I met him once after the war, tracked him down in 1953 to a factory in Ohio where he was working. I tried to give him the money then, tried to explain what it meant. You know what he said? He said, "Kid, you living your life is payment enough. Go home to your family and forget about Korea." Then he walked away from $10,000 like it was nothing. That night, I called my Uncle Royce and told him everything. At first, he thought I was joking. Then he thought I'd been scammed. When I sent him photos of the documents, he went silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. "Dad never said a word," Royce finally choked out, and I could hear him crying. "We grew up with nothing, Bryson. Mom worked 3 jobs after Dad hurt his back at the rail yard. We ate beans and rice 4 nights a week. He could have claimed that money any time. He was too proud. No, Bryson, he was teaching us something. That you don't do the right thing for rewards. You do it because it's right. But I wish he'd been a little less proud and a little more practical. Mom died still working, still worried about bills." 2 weeks later, I stood in my new office at Thompson Lumber Supply, a business I started with part of the trust money. The rest went into college funds for Juniper and my brother Royce's kids. I hired 5 employees in the first month, all veterans who needed work. On my desk, I kept Grandfather's bronze star in a frame, finally understanding why he never claimed the reward. Melody called when she heard about my windfall. Suddenly, she thought we should talk about reconciliation. I told her the only thing we needed to talk about was Juniper's college fund, which was now fully funded through graduate school if she wanted it. The silence on her end was worth more than any argument. But the real change wasn't the money. It was understanding where I came from. Every morning when I walked into my business, I thought about a 20-something soldier carrying a wounded teenager through enemy fire, refusing to let go even when bullets tore through his own body. That was my blood, my heritage, my legacy. 6 months after that October morning, Aldrich Pemberton passed, away peacefully in his sleep. His son James called to tell me, and to pass along his father's final message. Tell Bryson I finally kept my promise to Cecil. Tell him the debt is paid. At Aldrich's funeral, hundreds of people gathered to honor a man who'd built an empire, who'd donated millions to veterans' causes, who'd spent 70 years trying to repay a debt he felt he owed. But I knew the truth. The debt was never his to pay. My grandfather had given freely, without expectation, without even leaving his name behind for recognition. The delivery company routes still take drivers past the Pemberton mansion. Sometimes I see them walking up those marble steps, and I remember the day a package delivery changed everything. Not because of the money, but because it revealed who my grandfather really was, and in turn, who I could become. Thompsons don't quit. We might deliver packages for a while, but we're carrying more than boxes. We're carrying the legacy of those who came before us, even when we don't know it yet. My grandfather carried Aldrich Pemberton 2 miles through hell. Aldrich carried his gratitude for 70 years. Now I carry their story, and the responsibility to live up to both their examples. Some gifts are too precious to be measured in money, but sometimes money is the only way left to say thank you. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment about a time someone's kindness changed your life, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories that remind us what humanity is capable of at its best.